Good morning, good morning. How's everybody doing? Feeling good? Great, great, great. I'm Jeff Livingston. I lead a consultancy called EdSolutions, and I'm privileged to be back with this group of my friends. In August, we did this same panel that was so popular they asked us to do it again. And just like in August, you were only invited to be on this panel if you could, by yourself, fill 40 good minutes on this topic. And then they asked me to moderate too. So also like August, we are not going to have the full conversation. Instead, our goal is to spark your conversations about this and to update what's happened since August. And I will start with a story about a good-looking black kid from South Carolina who was a really good speech and debate participant. It's the latter part of the last century. He is at the Barkley Forum debate tournament at Emory University, the first big tournament of the year. In a round of original oratory that had 5 people in it, three judges, each were to rank the 5 people in order from best to worst. The one with the lowest score would win. Every one of the 3 judges agreed that our good-looking black kid from South Carolina was the second best speaker in this round. 2 of them gave him number 2, but the third one decided to make a point. So the third one ranked the best speaker number 1 and the second best speaker number 6 to make a point about how much better than the rest of us the first speaker was. Now, this story is relevant to our conversation today because the first speaker was my dear friend, Ketanji Brown, who since August has been nominated and looks likely to be the next Supreme Court justice. Now, I know, number one, the most important thing is I can now say that the only person who consistently and embarrassingly beat me in speech and debate now proves to be one of the greatest legal minds of our generation. So I can get over those 30-year-old wounds now. But for me, what's relevant to this conversation is that we all got to watch her perform beautifully in the face of several people whom she has known for decades, because they all went to Harvard Law School together, you get that right, who were behaving badly. So her calm, I watched her eat her anger, which she deserved to have, and I watched us all reward her for eating that anger. And so I come into this conversation wondering how long we're going to have to teach the Ketanji Browns of the world to eat their anger. So I'm now going to bring the smart people into the conversation and ask each of you to introduce yourself and your organization, as we did in August, to talk, if you would, about why we didn't call this panel equity. We said anti-racism, and what you think the difference is. And tell us about anything that's happened to you since August, or that happened to all of us since August, that has made this conversation more or less relevant. Can we start with my dear friend, Carmita Semaan?
Jeff, how am I following Ketanji?
This was my seat, but I switched.
It's a conspiracy.
It is a conspiracy. It's all a conspiracy. Will didn't slap Chris. It's a conspiracy. All right. Y'all, please stop that madness. Okay. I'm Carmita Semaan. I'm the founder and president of the Surge Institute. It's a few of y'all sprinkled in here. All right, he asked me to do something. I'm going to do something else because that's what black folks do. So in 2016, I asked for a set of scholarships to have some black and brown folks attend what used to be a very white, very elite, and now is, you know, a little different, but I asked for 5 scholarships to get black and brown educators to come into this space, and not just to be in the space, but to actually shape the space and shape and inform the conversations. That was 2016. This year, we have 70 folks from the Surge Network. And I make that statement because I think when you talk about anti-racism versus equity, you're talking about action. You're actually talking about intentional effort to get towards equity. And I want to acknowledge that, you know, in 2016, we were talking about conversations about representation and having people in the room and, you know, making people feel a lot less guilty because they saw black and brown faces in the space. And what I hope to do, and I know we'll get to lots of conversation about this, is to get to a space where we acknowledge that we need to, and this is aligned with your statement, we need to stop treating the people in the spaces like our mules. Like it is their job to somehow make us feel more comfortable with their presence. And I think that there's a lot of work that's required. A lot of what we have seen, in my opinion, since George Floyd has been performative wokeness, wrapped in a lot of guilt and language. And I want to see people's heart change, not their narrative. So.
Yeah, so I'm Sharif El-Mekki from the Center for Black Educator Development, and I was thrilled to hear you went from 5 to 70 because we are 5 now, and so that tells us where we're going to be, in the future. We're at the Center for Black Educator Development. Our work is to rebuild, a national black teacher pipeline that's sustainable, that's highly effective, but also predictable. So we begin with high school youth, inviting them into the profession, which they're doing already in the natural state, right? As black communities, brown communities, we learn intergenerationally, we learn in our community despite what institutions tell us, like, that's not real learning. The real learning happens within this institution. We have the exact opposite. We say, no, that's always been learning. This is a building that can be a part of the learning, but the learning never began in pre-K. The learning began in the womb in our community. So we're just a continuation and honoring that space, but just doing it in a formal way of what can you do to teach a first grader, second grader, or third grader as a 9th grader, 10th grader. Last year I introduced the audience to Horace, who's now at Morehouse man, and he's there's another Morehouse man who served as an apprentice and is continuing that journey to continue being that educator. This idea of equity, to me, it's too comfortable. When you can see anytime people latch onto a singular word and they're all waving it, they all got the T-shirts and bumper stickers, and nothing has changed for a black child. That means folks are very, very comfortable with it. And to me, it reminds me of charity in a way. Equity is a charitable word. And I say that because people can feel great about giving charity and not even think about the root causes that put people in those conditions, right? The end game isn't equity. It's never been. The end game is justice. And so equity was supposed to help you be aware, right? Because it all ends up in mindset. How are we aware of what's happening and then move towards justice? But most people are comfortable like, oh, this is justice, just saying the word, waving the flag, and that's what we have to push and challenge and resist in a lot of different ways.
Hello. Sorry. My name is Matthew K. I am a classroom educator first. I teach 9th and 10th graders English in Philadelphia. And I also am the author of Not Light But Fire, a book about how to lead meaningful race conversations in the classroom. And my biggest concern, we were asked to think about like what has changed since August. My biggest concern, I've had the opportunity to travel around the country working with educators on how to practically help them lead better race conversations, like on the ground. You have 33 kids, how do you do it? And I am encountering so much fear now. And it's so different than the kind of, in 2020 you had some of that energy, in 2021 you had some of that energy, okay, let's change things. And now, because of the laws that are being passed, and because of the all sorts of school board and freedom of information requests about your curriculum and all of those kind of things, teachers are terrified. And it's something I've taken personally. And I think when asked about the difference between anti-racism and equity, my biggest preference for anti-racism as a phrase is because it makes racism take up the space that it should in the conversation. Like, racism is alive, active, and needs to be combated. Yeah. And these laws make that so clear. And a lot of times when we go around speaking to teachers and say, you're not brave if you don't do this, you're not brave if you're not doing this, sometimes we forget to mention and really deal with the strength of the enemy we're facing. And to speak honestly with teachers about that and give them real practical ways about how to teach that unit they want to teach. And that's been my life's work, for, besides my students, of course, for the past 2 or 3 years.
What's the name of your book again?
Not Light, But Fire. Frederick Douglass was asked in 1852 to deliver a 4th of July speech that probably shows up on a lot of our timelines on the 4th of July. And in the last third of the speech, he says, but why'd you invite me to talk about this? Because, you want me to keep saying the obvious, that the enslaved person is a person. And it's like, you don't have these laws, speaking of laws, you have laws in the South to make it illegal to teach me how to read. You don't have those about cows and chickens. You know I'm a person. You have created an entire legal infrastructure meant on suppressing my humanity. Stop asking me to convince you that I'm a person. You know that. You built a system that says that. So that's where I got the title from. He says it's not light that is needed, but fire in that speech. And so that's what I'm trying to get these teachers to understand and to support them in the best way possible. Because a lot of folks are really trying, and they are rightfully terrified.
Thank you. My name is Shaka Mitchell. I'm the Director of State Strategy and Advocacy for the American Federation for Children. And I would encourage y'all in your comments to this panel to ask for like 2.5 hours next year. Because I just want to sit and listen. I just want to listen. And so I appreciate my fellow panelists up here, and Jeff too. But some things I've been thinking about. Let me try to package this. I've been thinking about how much actions matter. So our organization, we work in about 20 to 25 states at the state level on policy, primarily in public and private school choice. We are sector agnostic. I don't care what kind of school children attend. I want them to attend a school where the environment works for them. So I have 3 daughters, and some of y'all may have heard me say this last year. They are currently in public charter schools. My 11-year-old had a very hard time being on the computer for 18 months. It was very challenging. She's very social. So anyway, I see the diversity even within our own household and know that the same system doesn't work for every kid. So I've been thinking about how much actions matter. So since August, the school year started, right? We're now getting data back. And so I don't know if y'all saw the numbers that came out of Newark about 10 days ago, not even 10 days ago. The headline was no more than 6% of students between grades 3 and 8 are expected to be proficient in math. No more than 6%, no more than 10% in English. This is a majority black city, an overwhelmingly majority black school district. I do not question the heart and the motivation of faculty and staff in the school system. But what I do question, rightfully so, I think, is the efficacy of that system to teach our kids, right? Those numbers, those numbers don't lie, and that's what the system is. So, man, I hate now that I'm gonna have to follow Frederick Douglass quote, but there's a quote that I've read that I've been recently, and I've been sort of ruminating on, and it's this quote from Rousseau. He says that, and I'm going to sort of paraphrase it a little bit, but he says that force made the first slaves. We should not let cowardice perpetuate the condition. And so I think my challenge to attendees at ASU-GSV would be, don't let cowardice perpetuate having our kids in systems that obviously don't work for them. So we need to push. We've got rooms full of, right here, rooms full of innovators and smart people, and we're trying to put it together with VC money. Well, let's do something really bold. Let's actually challenge the status quo so that we can have physical and intellectual freedom.
I'm like, okay, look, I feel like this is like pull up the couch, we're in grandmama's house, sit down, get comfortable, we having real conversations. Hi, beautiful people. It is so nice to be here with all of you and to be engaged in this conversation. I'm Levadaberger. I work with an organization called Transcend, which really focuses on partnering with communities across the country to design and share liberatory school environments. I don't know, it's so interesting because you said since August, but honestly, so much of it has been the same, I would say, over the last few years, in terms of school communities saying, hey, we really want to focus on anti-racism. And I'm like, okay, that is wonderful. Let's get into it, right? Let's start to sit down and really say, what does that look like? And I'm going to ask you all a question. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to answer it just yet. But I'm like, if you were to sit down with a school team and they had just said to you, we want to work on anti-racism, what's one thing you imagine they might say is something we need to address? Just sort of think about it. What's one thing you think they might say we need to address? So that I don't increase your racial anxiety, I'm not going to ask you to share with a partner or the person next to you or anything like that. But one of the most fascinating experiences I had when working with a lot of school communities is one of the things they talk about is, we think we're asking kids to write things down too much. And I said, well, why is that the thing that's coming up for you? Okay. And they said, well, we've been really situating ourselves in this document, the characteristics of white supremacy culture. And they're like, we're trying to understand how do we use this to be anti-racist. And I'm like, this document is very helpful in a lot of contexts, but the way it gets applied to schools is often very reductionist. It's often focused on things that I'm like, wait a minute, what are you talking to me about? So we walk through it, right? And we talk through it. We talk about fear of open conflict and how that can be a distraction, how that can be a really challenging mindset. And I'm like, but what we're really talking about is fear of Black children. Right, fear of Black children. There's some things in this that when we focus on these characteristics, we don't really get at the heart of what we're talking about. But I understood it, right? To all the things we've been leaning into, it's hard, it's challenging. Folks are like, well, help me figure this out. I done been to the book clubs. Okay, that was the first thing y'all told me. I went to all the book clubs. I done read all the books, okay? The second thing they said, and then I keep hearing, now you gotta do your work. I literally had an ED say, Lavada, I know I need to do my work. What is my work? Okay. And part of me was like, I know the actual response is you need to go Google that because I'm a Black woman. You're not paying me to tell you to do your work. But then I said, well, wait, you are paying me. So, right, this is a different situation, okay? So part of the work that I and my team have really been trying to do is to say, how do we help ground people and what racism looks like? How do you see it, right? So there are certain things around behavior that were very explicit. They're like, we can pull up the data charts, we can look at this. Black boys are being sent out of class, we can talk about that. But oftentimes they would say, well, where do we look after that? And we don't want to just ask our Black staff members to tell us all the A, B, C, D, Y, Z we need to do. So what we really sat down to do was to say, folks have been researching this for years, right? Let's really pull some of this together, anchor in the experiences that your folks are having in your community, and start to try to put some paint on that wall. I don't know if y'all seen the movie, and sorry if this is a trigger warning, the movie where the woman is in an abusive relationship and her husband goes invisible to terrorize her. Invisible Man, thank you, you got me. I said, this is kind of like an invisible situation for some people. They can't see it. They don't understand, like, what does it look like? So I'm like, so let's put some paint on this, just like she did in that movie, and let's talk about how it shows up, right? So we talked about things like respectability. When you're in classrooms and you're talking about children needing to be kind and nice in the face of violence, why is that? What's underneath that? Right, we talked about things like the distribution of power. We said when we're talking about why there aren't black teachers in schools today, we need to go back and understand that there was a period of time where black teachers were removed very intentionally. So we need to look at those policies, right? So with this afternoon, we're going to have a part 2 of this panel where we're going to go in more detail and kind of workshop some of these details at the next level. We're going to have 2 workshops. We're going to do one that's focused on retention of black educators with Sharif and team, and we're going to do another one with a few of us sitting and talking through some of these other concepts and just saying, like, how do we put more paint on this situation when we're trying to work with schools in a very practical way to help them say, what does it mean to be anti-racist? And then say, okay, we're doing work to dismantle a thing, and we also have to do work, one, on the mindsets underneath that, and then 2, to say, what are we putting in this place? Because you can destroy your thing all day. If that thing still lives in your mind, you're going to rebuild it in a different word, in a different color, right? So we really try to focus on both of these. How do we do the work of dismantling? And then what are we building in this place? So we focus on liberatory schooling and trying to define that and put some color around it. But yeah, I hope y'all come. Love to be in more conversation with y'all. Nice to meet you.
Thank you so much, Lavada, and thank you for pointing out that this time we actually have a space to continue the conversation.
That's not the hallway?
Not the hallway. Not the hallway.
Because you know we do that.
We do, and we did in August, right? It's in the 2 o'clock block today. I think it's on the 32nd floor, where we're just going to continue these conversations here. So you just heard a lot of agreement among us. And that's because we all believe deeply in an anti-racist future. We respect each other enough to admit that we don't agree on everything. We disagree a lot on a lot of stuff. And it's my job as moderator to pull out some of that. So I want to do that now. And I want to talk in part about the thing that we have been talking about too much and yet not enough. I want to talk about a public altercation between a guy from West Philadelphia and a guy from Bedford-Stuyvesant. And I don't want to talk about those two guys because they were both rich and comfortable before and they're rich and comfortable now. I don't want to talk about them. I want to talk about the response of the rest of us. Because, Lavada, I know what my work is. My work is to figure out what racism is in me that I still need to get out, right? Because, anti-racism does not come with the melanin. It might come with the fly jacket, but not with the, not with the melanin. So, in the context of watching my friend Ketanji eat her righteous anger for a week, and then watching the most dramatic thing I ever saw happen at the Oscars come on, then I started listening to and watching on social media people I know and love say a couple of things that troubled my spirit. The first was, oh God, not in front of the white people. They should have gone to Denzel's house and talked about that. And then the other was 6 days after he broke the rules, he was out of the academy. People who raped 13-year-olds were in the academy for decades after they were convicted of that. So again, I don't care as much about the two people, they're going to be fine. But I can't, on my own anti-racist journey, say that I'm okay with the assumption that I'm allowed only a part of the spectrum of human emotions while other people get the whole thing. I can't agree with that. And I certainly can't agree with the notion that my infractions of norms must be immediately, harshly, and disproportionately punished because not only do they fear the black children, Lavada, they fear the black adults too. And so that's how I have been thinking about that. And I know that there are people here who do not want me to talk about this. People I love do not want me to talk about this. But I think if we can't talk about it here, if we can't talk about it in this panel, if we can't talk about it among us, where are we going to talk about it?
Denzel's house.
There you go. I'll meet you there. I'll meet you there. So here's how I want to connect the two themes with what I'm doing here. And I'll start with you, Sharif, since you know where Denzel's house is. If you drop me in any public school in America and told me to find a black male administrator, I would say, show me to the discipline office. Am I lying? Right? So, in the work that you do to prepare a pipeline of black educators, you must have come across this notion that whether it is formally a part of the job of the biggest, blackest African-American man in the building, he gets called upon to police the children all the time. Can you come help me calm my class down? Or can you talk to this student kind of thing? What is this obsession with the fear of black children? And this notion built of our history and built by our history and driving our history that we are sort of inherently violent and therefore must be controlled. And how should we as people who care about the business of teaching and learning think about those things on our anti-racist journey? What do you have to say?
Man, that's a lot to try to respond to. But what I will say is that you're absolutely right that black folks have a very particular experience, particularly in white space. If they find themselves as the lone and lonely, it gets exacerbated substantially. For years we've been pulling black men. It's open to everybody, but we really center the black men's experience in education. Black male educator convening. We're restarting it in person this fall. And one thing, Dr. Emden spoke about that I think speaks to this, and I've used this quote ever since, that the impact of that on even the black children. So yes, the black adult, yes, and the black child. What do they think when they have people who look like them that are sick on them at every time that they sneeze or look a different way? And he said, we're here recruiting black educators, but talking to black youth about considering leading a classroom, leading a school, starting a school, like just being in education is like recruiting someone back to the scene of a crime, the scene of a crime against themselves. And so when Dr. Emden talks about this, it really kind of paints the picture of like the work to be done to make sure that our black youth see a different type of experience. Now, when we talk about the black adults who are working in education, who are, again, not just administrators saying, hey, can you be a disciplinarian? Their colleagues are saying, can you come teach this class? And they're like, I don't teach that class. They're like, yeah, but, you look like them, you know them, and I need you to police them. And more than one city, more than one adult, black teachers have said, I've later had that person who constantly called me to support them, now they're my supervisor. Trying to tell me how to manage a class when my whole work has always been about building relationships and community. And so they're using a wholly different paradigm and framework and try to give me feedback. Because we know a lot of these systems, they train you how to work in systems. Black folks, a lot of times, we're coming with, we know how to work in community. That's a different framework, right? Like if I'm working from a lens of, you know how to work in systems and in schools as a system, but I know how to work with community and children, not something innately. My auntie modeled it. My parents modeled it. The barber modeled it. My coach modeled it, right? And so some of this black pedagogical framework, we're bringing to the space about how to build community, how to learn in whatever environment we're in, just looks very, very different than the experiences of so many, so many black educators. And so part of that is making sure that we are, one, no, we're not magical Negroes who just showed up and know how to do it. It is, there's actual, as my friend calls it, a black teaching tradition that we've learned, and we didn't have to go to college to learn it, we learned it in our community. Because you know what? They are always teaching and learning when you're in a community of love, right? And so, but trying to be, having that evaluated by someone that doesn't believe in that doesn't believe in the community, that in some levels, some of it not so subtly, actually, I'm working in the system and I have contempt for the people who are in it. Mm-hmm. And we gotta believe.
Say that.
We gotta believe that there are a lot of folks who are leading classrooms, schools, districts, and boards, philanthropy, VC, whatever, that have a level of contempt for the people who they claim they're there to support.
I hear that.
I just want to underscore some brilliance here. You talked about relationship, not proximity. And I think people have taken the brilliant Brian Stevenson's words and contorted and warped them into their, and talked about proximity as the way that we achieve liberatory education. But proximity is about being close. I can be close to you and have contempt for you, right? I can be close to you and think I'm better than you. And I think we have to get really deep and raw and honest in a number of these conversations. I'm gonna tell you the truth. Working in Chicago public schools, some of the worst things I heard said about black babies were from black preachers, okay? And a lot of what I experienced was triggering for me as a child who grew up in poverty and seeing middle and upper class black and brown folks look down on poor children, have lower expectations, assume several things about their wants, needs, desires, hopes, dreams, and that of their families and communities. And if we don't have those kind of conversations, so Jeff, to your point, anti-racist systems, schools require anti-racist leaders. That requires a level of work that all of us have to do, even in our spaces among all folks of color. I've built an organization that's all folks of color, and we have to talk about, why is it that one person of color, when discussing a black person on the same staff, says that person has an attitude, but they don't say that about someone else? Why do they say, when this person talks a little louder to me, I feel frightened, I'm frightened? And those are real conversations, and this might not be the right place to have it, but I think that it's important for us to unpack a lot of these things, because it's not just about us being present. It's not just about us being in the seats. It's about us changing the conversation, changing the way we see and operate with our young people, centering their humanity. And we can't do that if we haven't done our own work. We're trying to lead people to breakthrough from our own brokenness. And if we don't heal that, we won't actually achieve what it is that we set out to.
Indeed. I love this conversation, excuse me, about our own brokenness and that sort of thing. And I want to direct it in a direction that I think is going to be cool for you. I saw you there. Respectability, right? I am perfectly conscious that this African American born in the colored wing of a public hospital in 1970 in South Carolina can afford to come to San Diego for a week because he is really good at making white people feel comfortable and has been since he was a child, right? I'm perfectly aware of that and always have been. But eventually that's got to stop, right? What had been a survival tactic is starting to look like religion to me in some places. And I find it annoying. And I find it a barrier to a real anti-racist future. That some of those African-American educators you spoke about who say horrible things about some of our African-American children are all of them in the 25% of African-American adults who have a college degree. And in Chicago, the vast majority of their students are in the 75% of black households where nobody has a college degree, right? And so from the beginning, the purpose of race was to obscure class, to make sure that poor white people and poor black people never were together, right? And even within our community, it's doing that some too. So please join this conversation. Respond to this or anything else that you were saying there.
Well, one thing that this brings to mind is, and that can be humbling for even those among us who think we're really good at this stuff, is really thinking about what does "but it was in front of white people" mean in all of the spaces we're in. Like, how does that frame our conversations about grammar? How does that frame our conversations about just whatever is part of our practice? And I'm wondering, how often do we use versions of but it was in front of white people, not knowing that that's what we're saying, right? When I speak to a 10th grader about, if you do not indent your paragraphs, they will make these assumptions about you, what am I saying? If I say, if you don't, when I speak to the president of our Black Student Union, it says, if you walk into a meeting and you don't have I just had this conversation because she had a bad meeting, and I was like, you came into this meeting and you were unprepared for this meeting, and am I saying a version of, but it was in front of white people? And I think that's where it can be, and I self-identify as someone who's halfway decent at this stuff, but I might find myself, respectability politics can be really sneaky. Like, it can really get into our conversations with students that are really well-intentioned and are really about survival, right? But we go into the spaces, wait a minute, what I'm actually saying is when you leave this cocoon and you go into the white world, this will trip you up. And that's something I'm not comfortable communicating with my students in that way.
I'm gonna try to jump in real quick because we see this clock up here. It's so anxiety inducing. So I'm gonna give you like a bunch of quick hits. All right. So about the incident, I thought about two lines from an actual rapper, Jay-Z. One was
actual Shaka. All right.
One was
All right.
hey, no one wins when the family feuds. Right. The second one, though, was frankly, and he, he bit off the Old Testament prophets, but vengeance is mine, says the Lord. And so, to the point about respectability, and even to soon-to-be Justice Brown, I do want to say that there is I think there's a fallacy in thinking that the person who holds in and takes the abuse is morally deficient. That is not true, right? And so when you're watching Judge Brown, soon-to-be Justice Brown, sort of doing like she did, she's absolutely heaping coals on the head of people asking the questions. And I believe that, right? And so I think the other thing that I was thinking about is like, we just have to be really careful to sort of say, yeah, we have these expectations, but like there is a such thing as excellence, and you know that, right? And there's such a thing, we're calling our students to excellence, and I don't want to dilute that.
Can't we also call excellence to our students? Can't we say that there is something inherent in them that comes from their culture that
100%.
I've been listening, Dr. Emden, I've been listening. I think that's a part of it too. Lavada, do you?
The last thing I'll name is, this is like I'm rocking because I feel like I'm at church. It's that type of thing. But the last piece that's on my mind is how do we situate this work so that we're not choosing for young people? Because I think this thing that you said of like, if I said to them, here's why I'm saying this, now choose how you want to go out into the world, as opposed to us saying, here's what I think you need to do, and this is what I'm going to do on your behalf and for you.
Right.
How do we make that transition while we're doing this and doing our, anchoring in our best attempt to prepare them for a world that doesn't love them and have them be free? It's like, how the hell,
Exactly.
So I'm like, how do we get them in that situation where they can make some of those choices for themselves?
Right.
Can we not conflate perfectionism and excellence?
Yeah.
That works for me.
And I think I wrote a little thing about this. I'm happy to share with people, but here's the thing. Anytime somebody talks about excellence as dominant culture or white supremacy, I want to smack something out of them.
Exactly.
Because that's not what
Don't
I
do it
was
on
raised.
TV.
I won't do it on TV. But that's not what I was raised to believe. I was raised to believe that I was inherently excellent, that I came from a legacy of builders and creators and mathematicians and scientists and healers. And I was raised, it probably isn't PC to say it, it's like all of this is because of us. That's what I was raised to believe. So this notion that somehow excellence is, it is often used to mean perfectionism, that is rooted in all kind of toxicity, is in and of itself, to me, implicitly racist.
That's right.
So I just want to, if you don't hear anything else, don't be telling our babies they ain't excellent, because they are.
So, as we said, we're going to continue this conversation, but I want to end on a really positive note. I believe deeply that this week, the Supreme Court will be joined by a woman. Hear me now. The daughter of two educators, whose name is Ketanji Onika Brown Jackson, which is the blackest name I have ever heard. And I want everybody here to know that those of us who know and love her assure you that she is who you think she is from watching her. Thank you so much.